Hello, thank you for joining us this afternoon for today's Andrews webinar. We're very happy to be able to introduce you today to Dr. Samara Sterling. Dr. Sterling serves as the research director for the Peanut Institute and has expertise in the use of plant-based nutrition for the prevention and treatment of chronic diseases. She holds a bachelor's degree from Stony Brook University, a master's degree from Andrews University, and a Ph.D. from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Active in the research community, he is a reviewer for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Preventing Chronic Disease Journal, as well as the Journal of Racial and Ethnic Health Disparities. We're all eager to hear what Dr. Sterling has to share, so let's get started. And I'd like to remind everybody that there will be a Q&A session at the end, so please type your questions into the Zoom chat or message us on Facebook and we will share your question. Dr. Sterling, welcome. We're so glad you could join us this afternoon.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. So to start off with, what made you decide to pursue a career path in nutrition?
That's a great question. And as I go into that question, I know the viewers might see me looking off to the side. That's because as soon as we started this webinar, it looks like there's a tornado that might be coming through. So I apologize for that, friends. We'll just hope that the tornado does not make it through during our live conversation. So on that first question there about what made me decide to pursue a career in nutrition, well, I've always been interested in nutrition ever since I was a child. My parents always tell this story about me at the age of 3 being in the kitchen and trying to cook different recipes. And it's something that I never grew out of. So I was obviously always very much interested in food. And cooking and nutrition, although nutrition science is not really much about cooking, but I was also interested in food. But there were a few defining moments for me throughout my life. I would say when I first went to college, that's when I first was introduced to friends who had alternate diets, people who were pescatarian, vegetarian, etc. And that was something that was very much foreign to me. That made me kind of think a little bit. I call it a life nudge that sort of made me think about why would people eat differently, or what is it about food that they're thinking of that I'm not thinking of. And then I would say the next defining moment for me was when my father was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease. And I remember some of the symptoms that he would experience. And I would be looking online trying to figure out ways to alleviate some of those symptoms. And as I did that, I found out just how much of an effect nutrition had on health. And this is what made me say, oh my goodness, like, you know, I never heard that. This was completely foreign to me. And as I started looking at information, I realized that there was so much out there that it was hard to know what to trust, what to actually believe. And so I decided that I wanted to go back, get some formal education so that I could make the best decision for myself, my family, and my community to be able to make the best decisions as far as nutrition and our health.
How did Andrews prepare you for the work you're doing now?
So Andrews was definitely key to my success. I say that all the time. Well, first of all, I didn't have a background in nutrition, as I mentioned before. My undergrad was in health science, which is, general health science, and I focused on clinical studies there. And when I started to become interested in nutrition, Andrews was, first of all, one of the few universities that had a program that focused on plant-based nutrition and the effect of that on health. That was very much interesting to me. The other thing was that Andrews provided a pathway for me to take some of the prerequisite courses that I didn't have from my previous background, take those courses while I'm learning the science of nutrition, so that way I could advance through my studies with a little bit more ease. And then the studying itself was, I think, the fact that there was just so much interaction between the professors and the staff. You really had that one-on-one attention to be able to understand the subjects that you were learning. And then I had a couple mentors who were specifically looking at nut consumption and health. First time I had heard it, but it was very interesting to me what they were studying. And I got a chance to be exposed to some of their research. And this is what made me want to continue in that area, both in the plant-based nutrition space as well as nut consumption space. So Andrews was definitely a key stepping stone for my success.
So you're now the research director for the Peanut Institute. Obviously, the nuts conversation had an impact down the road. Why peanuts?
Peanuts. Well, when you think about nut consumption, so I moved earlier, Laura and I were talking about the cold winters in Michigan. And when I decided that I wanted a little bit more of the tropics, somewhat of the tropics or a little bit of heat, I decided to move down south for my PhD. And I did my PhD at University of Alabama at Birmingham, where I studied more about plant-based nutrition and health. Nuts came in because I was looking at a rural community and trying to figure out how can we increase the diet quality in a way that can positively impact this community and help to change their health outcomes. And from my background in nut consumption, I knew that this was a very integral piece. Now, when we talk about why peanuts, again, this was a lower income rural community. And so when you talk about nuts, you have to think about, well, what's affordable, what's accessible to everyone. And the two nuts that were popular in Alabama, as well as in Georgia, where I am now, were pecans and peanuts. And peanuts obviously had that advantage for being very much accessible to a wide range of people, regardless of which community, what environment you were in. If you were in a food desert or a city, you could get real good access to peanuts. And so for me, that was definitely a positive to be able to look at peanut consumption and health in this community and to continue those studies.
Can you share with us more about what you're currently doing in your position at the Peanut Institute?
Sure. So to answer that, I want to give a bit of background on the Peanut Institute. So we are a health and wellness organization, and we do targeted research and education, as well as communication efforts about the health benefits of peanuts. This actually started in the 1990s when people thought that all nuts were bad because of their high fat content. And, you know, there was a low fat craze of the 1990s. Don't eat nuts, they're fat in a shell. And so peanuts were definitely affected by that. And really, it wasn't until there was research from the Adventist Health Study at Loma Linda University that showed that nuts, including peanuts, can actually reduce your risk for developing cardiovascular disease. And it was really sort of out of that time period, some of that early research, that the Peanut Institute was formed to help to elucidate some of those benefits. So what I do as part of my role is that, as the research director, is that I manage the research that the Peanut Institute supports here in the United States as well as globally, that looks at how peanuts and peanut butter and other peanut products affect our health and our health outcomes. I'm also very much involved in the policy space as well as communication. So marketing communication, I work very closely there as well. And it's just been definitely a great fit in terms of the skill set that I received, no doubt from Andrews, as well as just my passion about nut consumption. I always say, we always say it was sort of a match made in heaven to be in this position for sure.
That's great. Well, right now, obviously, COVID-19 is at the forefront of everyone's minds, and there's been a lot of talk about how to prevent catching COVID-19. What are some tips for building your immune system and preventing catching the coronavirus?
Good question. And before I answer that question, I will say, let's give a disclaimer that what we talk about here is not intended to be a substitute for personal medical attention. And then the other thing is that we cannot necessarily give advice to say, if you do what I say, you will never, ever, ever catch COVID-19. But what we can talk about is a reduction in risk of catching COVID-19 or a reduction in risk of having poorer outcomes if you do come in contact with the virus. So as we talk about immunity boosting, you've been hearing this, I'm sure many of us have been hearing this, and this is key. We have to think about boosting our immune system. So we're talking about foods that are vitamin C rich, for example. So that includes your citrus fruits, kiwis, guavas. If you have guavas, some people don't know Walmart tends to sell guavas quite a bit. You can check on that because guavas have a very high content of vitamin C. Some other nutrients you want to think about: zinc, which tends to be high in your whole grains, your nuts. Some fruit have zinc as well as vitamin D. You want to make sure that you're consuming enough vitamin D. And I should qualify that statement. If you are a vegetarian, then you want to make sure that you're thinking about this. And particularly if you have a darker skin complexion like myself, we tend to absorb less vitamin D from the sun. So it is advisable that, you know, especially during this time, you want to take a supplement, a vitamin D3 supplement. And then beyond that, what's exciting is that there is some research that is showing specific foods and their potential effect on COVID-19. Even though there's still a lot of research that's needed in this area, there is some promising research that we do have. And particularly in the absence of medical knowledge, we want to use the tools that we do have. So some of those foods include garlic, for example. There was a study that was published at the end of March that showed at least 17 compounds within garlic essential oil that was able to target specific COVID-19 receptors and potentially be able to knock COVID-19 out. This is early stages, but it shows a lot of potential. A couple others: ginger. Ginger contains an antioxidant called curcumin, which is very well known in terms of its ability to fight upper respiratory infections, as well as lemons. Lemons are high in vitamin C, lemongrass, and licorice. There's a tea that I like to drink. It's an herbal tea, and I'm not saying anyone needs to drink it. I'm just telling you what I do. There's a tea that I drink, and it's called the Bigelow Lemon Ginger Tea. Reason I like that tea is because many of the ingredients that I talk about before, that I mentioned before, the tea actually has those ingredients plus probiotics. So it has lemons, lemongrass, ginger, and licorice, which is typically pretty hard to get. And then it has probiotics, which helps to increase the good bacteria that's within your gut. That's important because what we're finding in science is that there's a huge connection between the bacteria in your gut and how your immune system is able to function. So I would say just look into those ingredients and make sure that your diet is one that is filled with whole foods, anti-inflammatory foods that'll boost your immune system.
Other than the tea, which sounds delicious, we might all have to go out and get some now. Have you personally changed anything about your diet or supplements for preventing COVID-19?
Sure, I have a couple things. At the foundation of COVID-19, one of the things that we're finding is that inflammation within the body increases your risk for poorer outcomes. And inflammation is sort of your body's response to injury. So what I've been focusing on is trying to implement an anti-inflammatory diet. So that means a diet that's filled with whole grains, fruits, nuts, vegetables, as well as another thing is I'm watching and limiting my sweets because sugar tends to weaken the immune system, and you want to make sure you have as strong as immune system as you can. And then I do take supplements. I think I might have alluded to this before. I take zinc. I also take vitamin D. And then I do also take allicin, which is one of the main ingredients in garlic that I talked about before. Oh, and I want to mention one more thing. Beyond food, I'm very intentional about making sure I get enough sleep, as well as I tend to air out my home, my space. just kind of keeping the windows cracked so that the air can get filtered. I think that's a pretty good practice to have, especially in a time like this.
Sounds good. The follow-up question is, of course, what if even if you do all you can to prevent it, what if you do get COVID-19? Of course, those who are hospitalized are probably being given some specific medical care, but we know there's a lot of stories about people recovering from milder symptoms at home, or perhaps home from the hospital, but healing. What would you tell someone in this situation for supporting a speedy and full recovery, especially someone perhaps who might have other underlying issues they've also been battling?
Sure. Well, first things first, if you have been diagnosed with COVID-19, please stay home. Stay home, stay as much away from people as you can. You want to make sure that we as a society are trying to contain it and be considerate of others around us. So that's the first thing. I know it seems intuitive, but I think it's important to say. And I also think that if you are under medical supervision, please follow doctor's orders, because there's a lot of information out there now. And, some people may be confused about what to follow. Let's stick with what we know and follow the doctor's orders. Beyond that, if you're thinking about a speedy recovery, there are a couple of natural remedies that we do know help with recovering from upper respiratory infections, and they may or may not help with COVID-19. But it's worth a try if you would like to try it. And I do know of some folks who have tried some of these. So, for example, a steam bath is a good one, especially if you have a fever. That's a good hydrotherapy tool to use, where you basically have a large bucket of water, of very, very hot water. You put a board over it, and in that hot water, you want to use essential oils. Some of the ones specific that I've seen in the literature, in the scientific literature, to upper respiratory infections like COVID-19 include thyme essential oil, eucalyptus is another one, lemongrass oil is another one that you might want to use in that hydrotherapy, and just kind of cover yourself for maybe 30 to 45 minutes, blotting your forehead with cold water from time to time. And that seems to do well in terms of breaking a fever. And then beyond that, again, as I talked about that anti-inflammatory, anti-inflammation diet, you want to try to include some of those foods. So making sure you're eating your fruits and your vegetables, and making sure that you're staying away from foods that will just weaken your immune system. So I always tell people, as much as plant-centered as you can be, especially if you're battling illness, that's really the best place to be.
Can you tell us some more about the research you've been involved in with chronic disease prevention and treatment?
Sure. So we're involved in quite a bit of research on peanut consumption and health, and not just peanuts, like snack peanuts, but we're talking about things like peanut butter and peanut powder and other peanut oil, other peanut products. We look at areas of disease prevention, such as diabetes or even Alzheimer's disease. But what we're seeing in the research too is that there's been this shift from simply disease prevention, and we're starting to look at overall health and wellness. So even if you don't have disease, how can what you eat help you to have more energy, more satiety, live a better quality life in general? So we're looking at areas of fitness, for example, or areas of cognition. Can the foods that I eat help me to think clearer, think better, have better memory, learn better in school for those who are in school? And so those are actually some of the areas that we're looking at with peanut consumption. And that's been really exciting just to see the potential that's there, the opportunities that are there, and we're excited for what the future holds. At least I am. And I'll just say too that one of my personal passions is looking at how the foods that we eat can particularly help in the area of health disparities research. So where I live is actually close to areas that are considered to be food deserts, where there's not much access to food. So thinking about ways to advise folks who may not have much access to healthy foods, and how can we help to improve the diet quality there? I think that's something that those two areas there are something that I've been really very much working on and very much interested in.
What can you share with for somebody who has food allergies, in particular a nut allergy?
Yeah, so that's also an exciting area too. When we talk about allergies, there are really two areas, prevention and treatment. So on the prevention side, there's really some exciting research that started in 2015 from what's known as the LEAP study that showed that if you introduce peanuts and peanut products, basically peanut products, you don't want to give peanuts to a baby, but if you include peanut containing products in your infant's diet between 4 to 6 months before the first birthday, that can reduce the risk of developing a peanut allergy by about 86%. And this has resulted in some policy changes, as well as the dietary guidelines for Americans, which will be released at the end of this year, is recommending that parents do that. So that's on the preventative side. On the treatment side, if you do, like you said, have a peanut allergy, there are also treatments that are coming on the market that are designed to help to treat that. One was approved by the FDA at the end of January earlier this year. And basically what it is peanut protein being given in small doses and increasing those doses incrementally to help to desensitize a person from a severe reaction if you accidentally are exposed to peanut products. So the hope here is not necessarily to cure the allergy completely, but to desensitize a person so that it's not life-threatening if you come in contact with peanut products. That way, no one has to necessarily live in fear, but can take better control of the things that might come in the way of better health for them.
Those do sound like some promising developments.
Sure.
Another hot trend I've heard about in a lot of circles is keto. What are your thoughts on a keto diet?
Well, I think that any diet, if followed intentionally, can actually be healthy, and that includes a keto diet. I wouldn't say that I am a fan of the keto diet, but, and for those who don't know, the keto diet is one that is very low in carbohydrates. It restricts it to typically less than 20 grams of carbohydrates a day, considering that the usual amount that Americans eat is about 130 to 200 grams a day. So you're talking less than 20 grams of carbs a day. And it was first discovered as a treatment for epilepsy. So there's keto diet as well as other low carb diets. Now, the issue that can sometimes arise with diets like these is that we know that there's benefits in the short term, like you can experience weight loss in the short term, but in the long term, we really don't know what can happen to a person's body, and that's concerning. One of the main concerns is cardiovascular disease because low carb diets tend to replace carbs with fats, and a lot of times the fats are saturated fats. So they tend to be high in meats, high in saturated fat, as well as low in plant foods. And that's the main concern. So I would say if you want to follow a keto diet, you just have to be intentional about including your fruits and including your vegetables, your low carb fruits and your low carb vegetables, as well as substituting some of that animal protein for plant-based proteins, such as peanuts or beans or other nuts, etc.
Are there any foods you say to 100% always avoid?
Of course, we know from the literature that there are foods that we should limit in our diet. So we should, as far as scientific research, there are some foods that we should limit. But I do like to focus more on what we should include within our diets, because I think if we frame it positively, it gives people a lot more hope. And the truth is that the more of the positive foods we include in our diet, the less of the negative or less healthy foods we'll have space for in our diets. So I like to say, rather than thinking about what we avoid, think about what you emphasize, because a person could be vegetarian or vegan and just eat French fries and sugary drinks, and that's also not healthy. So focus on getting your plant foods, fruits, nuts, vegetables, whole grains, and I think the rest will follow.
Are you a believer in food diaries or tracking calories? And if so, is there an app or any tips you'd recommend to help someone with this?
Yeah, so I think if a person wants to use a food diary or calorie tracker, that's fine. Just understand that there are limitations to them simply because of the calorie count. It's hard to count the calories really for reasons that we could get into later. But I have not used one in a long time. I think I've tried MyFitnessPal or a calorie counter. And I basically use those to get a general look at what my diet's looking like. So not necessarily the calories, but I get to see, am I eating too much sodium? Am I eating enough fruit? Am I eating too much sweets? That gives you a general idea of what you are actually eating so that you can make the adjustments. So for sure, I say if you're looking at an app, go for it.
So more of a snapshot in time rather than a lifestyle.
Sure, exactly.
Do you have any tips for motivating those of us who love a variety of not so healthy foods to stick with a better nutrition plan?
I say the key for that is to have a substitute. Anything that you take away in your diet, you want to offer yourself something better. Otherwise, you will fall right back into the habits that you're trying to avoid. So if you are into potato chips and that's your favorite go-to snack, there are a lot of healthier or healthy-ish snacks that are coming out now that you can substitute with. You can substitute with homemade popcorn, or you can substitute that with some of those baked chickpea snacks, or just find one that fits your palate. But the key here is to substitute it with something so that when you have the craving, you don't have to fulfill that craving. You know where to go instead.
What is your personal favorite healthy snack?
I think that changes depending on the season. I like trying many different things, but I've been really into hippies lately. I don't know if you're familiar with hippies. It's like a chickpea based puffed corn snack, and they've got it's a plant-based vegan snack, and they've got like different flavors like nachos, etc. And then, I mean, beyond that, I mean, I'm at the Peanut Institute, so I always have a pack of peanuts with me for a quick snack that's filling and satisfying.
Do you use plain unsalted peanuts, or what's your views on honey roasted versus salted versus other?
Well, to be honest, I use it all. There's so much peanuts around. I use it all for sure. And then as you mentioned that, I should say that by law, peanut butter has to be 90% peanuts in the United States. So, for some that may add a little bit of sugar or a little bit of salt. Whatever your preference is, you can feel free to use either of those. I like whatever is available.
Sounds good. And our final question, what resources would you recommend for those wanting to learn more about this topic?
Sure. So if you'd like to learn more about peanuts are so fun. And I mean, I can talk about peanuts all day. You can visit our website, www.peanutinstitute.com. And if you'd like to learn about plant-based nutrition, you can always follow me. Veggie Nutrition Doctor, you can always follow me. But check out our website, because on our website we have a lot of recipes, especially for the COVID-19 season. We have a lot of recipes there that you can try out, as well as some informational facts if you'd like to get more education about the topic.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and move now into the Q&A with our viewers. So for those of you watching, feel free to type your questions into Zoom chat, or if you're watching it live via Facebook, again, you can comment or message us and we'll ask Samara your question. The first question is, what is the nutritional difference between peanut powder and peanut butter, and how is peanut powder made?
Oh, that's a good question. So for peanut powder is basically what you see on the market. It's basically powdered peanuts, right? But it is defatted, so a lot of the fat is taken out. That's what helps it to become that powder form. And it depends on what you're looking for. So in terms of the nutrition, 2 tablespoons of peanut powder will contain between 7 to 8 grams of protein. What that does, if, for example, you want to use it for fitness, you can actually use quite a bit more of that if you want to get more protein, simply because it's defatted, so you'll be able to consume a lot more of it. When you're talking about peanuts, a handful of peanuts contains between 7 to 8 grams of protein as well, so they're pretty comparable. The only difference really nutritionally is the fat content. So if you're looking to get quick energy, satiety, you want to feel full after you eat, I would say go with the peanuts. If you're looking for protein for your fitness routine, you can try the peanut powder there, as well as peanut butter. But either form, it really just depends on what you're doing with it. But yeah, they're both pretty good in protein, and then the peanuts for the healthy fat.
Next question is, my son doesn't like to drink milk. He is 14 years old and very athletic. He also doesn't like to take vitamins. What foods contain calcium and vitamin D?
Okay, so for vitamin D, if you are a omnivore, if you're an omnivore, then quite a few meat products will contain your vitamin D. If you are a vegetarian or a vegan, your main sources of vitamin D, I mean, you mentioned the milk, so that would be one. If he is okay with a plant-based milk, you might want to try that. Mushrooms also contain vitamin D, and it depends on the type of mushroom and how much they've been exposed to the sun. Mushrooms contain vitamin D2, which is the form that needs to be converted to the active form to do what it needs to do in the body. So I would say include mushrooms. If he's okay with a plant-based milk rather than a dairy milk, you can try that as well. Otherwise, honestly, during this time, if you are a vegetarian, honestly, during this time, you might want to consider a supplement. And if you are an omnivore, you can try meats as well.
What herbs or supplements are best for overcoming long-term respiratory effects and fatigue from a bad viral illness?
So I'm not sure exactly what illness we're talking about. So the supplements, I'm not sure that I can adequately answer that question, and I wanna do that question justice. I'm not sure that I have the expertise to answer that in terms of long-term lung illness and vitamins. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know if I can answer that one.
Do you believe in oil-free, fat-free, or sugar-free diets?
I think, like I said before, in terms of diets, any one of them can be healthy. Many of them, I should say, can be healthy. So particularly the sugar-free diets. The issue that you might run into here is that just think about, whenever you think about a diet that says X-free, it means that there is something that's being substituted in its place. And for a sugar-free diet, what's being substituted is sugar alcohols, which are not typically absorbed. Some of them are 0 calorie, but in terms of the long-term effects of what that might do for chronic diseases or other conditions, we're not really too sure yet. Most of them seem to be safe. But another concern is that in a sugar-free diet, you may actually end up eating more than you would on a regular sugar diet, because what the evidence is now showing is that your body may not necessarily be able to identify that fake sugar, so to speak. And so the way that it processes it tends to make you eat more than you would if you were on a regular diet. So I would say if you're trying a sugar-free diet, just watch your intake and see if you really are eating more or less and how your body responds to that.
Next question is, can you suggest some anti-inflammatory foods that can be grown at home?
Grown at home. So if you're thinking about herbs, for example, herbs are pretty good to grow, especially in the summertime. Things like basil, thyme. I mentioned thyme. Thyme has been getting quite a bit of attention in terms of COVID-19 in the scientific literature. So that's one. Uh, well, you wouldn't necessarily grow ginger at home, but you can. I would say you can focus on the herbs. Lemongrass is another one that you may be able to grow. Now, if you are in an open area where, let's say you have garden space, then I would say focus on your dark green leafies. You can grow kale, you can grow cabbage, you can grow collard greens. That's one in the South that we grow quite a bit. And it just depends on where you are. If you're in a space where I know some of my coworkers are actually, my colleagues actually growing lemons right now. So that's a really good one. I think just take a look at the season that we're in and what can be grown where you are, and then take it from there. Most fruits and vegetables are anti-inflammatory. So that's a good place to start.
Going back to peanuts, what have you found causes peanut allergies? Has there been any research on if it's caused by pesticides, GMOs, or anything along those lines?
So the allergen in the peanut is actually from the protein itself, that's in the peanut. So it's not, from what we know, it's not necessarily from pesticides or GMO. And I'm assuming that where that question is coming from is the idea that, you know, a lot of people say, well, when I was growing up, I didn't see peanut allergies, but now all of a sudden there are many peanut allergies. Where is it coming from? So the LEAP study that I mentioned before in 2015, that was the exact question that they were trying to ask. And basically what they did was that they looked at children in Israel, and then they looked at genetically similar children in the UK. And what they saw was that the children in Israel did not have peanut allergies, but the children in the UK did. And that was baffling because they were very similar genetically. But what they did find was that the children in Israel were introduced to peanut products as just a part of life. Whereas in westernized countries such as the UK and even in the United States, we were not introducing peanut products until maybe 3 years to 4 years of the child's life. We were actually avoiding foods that would be potential allergens. And that's what they were able to find, to say it's the avoidance factor of peanut that seemed to have more of an effect in terms of developing the allergy. Not saying we'll eradicate it completely, but that has more of an effect, that seems to have more of an effect than anything else.
Interesting. Next question is, what is your feeling about fake meats?
That's a good question about fake meats. Okay, so I think it depends on where you are in your journey. Again, remembering the concept that any diet can be a healthy diet. Most diets, I shouldn't say any diet, but most diets can be a healthy diet. So if, for example, you have a craving for that fake chicken, I think you're okay eating the fake chicken. However, you just want to make sure that your diet is not centered around fake meats, right? Your main protein sources, you want to make sure that's coming from your nuts and your legumes. And a lot of times what we find with the meat analogs, rather than saying fake meats, with the meat analogs is that they tend to be higher in sodium and they can be heavily processed. Very interestingly, one of our colleagues at Harvard did a study that was published, I believe in February earlier this year. And what they found was that they were comparing different plant-based diets. And they were able to identify a healthy plant-based diet versus an unhealthy plant-based diet that included a lot of the processed meat analogs. And what they found was that there was no difference in that diet and risk of chronic diseases like heart disease and cancer, and I believe diabetes was in there as well. The true difference came in when a person was eating a healthy plant-based diet, when their main sources of food was in your whole foods and your unprocessed foods. So I would say once in a while, periodically, no, you're not going to die for eating a fake chicken, but just be mindful of your entire diet and making sure that it's centered around good foods.
How do you approach healthy meal planning and prep when you're super busy?
I always say, because I fall in that category, I typically travel quite a bit for my job, at least 50%. Well, right now I'm not traveling, obviously, but one of the things that I always say, have a rice cooker and have a crock pot. You have these two things, your life is saved. Because if you have a busy schedule and you have no time to cook, you can just put this on, or even an Instapot now, you know, you can just put on something really quick. You get a bag salad in the grocery store, and that's your quick meal right there. But as it comes on to busy lifestyle and healthful meal prep, there still has to be planning. And that's one of the things that for busy professionals, sometimes the food gets to like the bottom of the pile in terms of planning. But what I always say is at the beginning of the week, think about what you do want to eat throughout the week. Make sure you have your healthy snacks on hand. So your nuts are always there. Having accessible fruits like a banana, that's something that's portable that you can always bring with you. And then just make sure that you include things that are quick and simple. Pasta dishes are also quick, such as the crock pot, just like the crock pot and the rice cooker. Have those two things and you'll be good.
Next question is, we heard in the news about a lot of meat packing plants being closed due to COVID outbreaks. Are you aware of any studies being done to see if carnivores or people who eat meat are more susceptible to COVID-19?
So as far as the literature right now, there's just more so theory, not necessarily any hard evidence, just because it's so new. But there are definitely papers that are pointing to the fact that if you have a more plant-centered diet, you're more likely to do well. This is not hard evidence again, it's just theoretically, you're more likely to do well because of some of the things that we talked about, the anti-inflammation and immune boosting properties of those plants, rather than a pro-inflammatory approach. So I don't see that in the literature right now, just more so theory.
What are your thoughts on intermittent fasting?
So I would say as a temporary measure, intermittent fasting can be fine because it can help to reboost your metabolism and it might help, but it might help in terms of weight loss as well. As far as a long-term lifestyle, I don't know that we have enough data to be able to recommend that as a long-term lifestyle. I do think that if you are consistently denying yourself foods, what tends to happen is that you end up eating more when you can actually eat. So if your purpose for the intermittent fasting is weight loss, then you just kind of want to monitor yourself that you're not overindulging when you are in those periods of eating foods.
Next question, and I think we'll just take a couple more. Are peanuts a complete protein source?
So peanuts have all the amino acids that you need for health, and they are considered a very valuable protein source. With that said, there are a couple limiting amino acid, and the main one is lysine, which is similar to other legumes, lysine. However, if you have a peanut butter sandwich, you have your complete protein right there. Because what tends to happen in the diet is that if you're missing protein here and you eat it with a complementary food, it really doesn't matter because that's made up with just the food that you eat. In general, there's lots more I could say on complete proteins, but I think I'll leave it at that.
All right, let's just ask one more question and I think then we'll wrap it up. So last question is, where's a good source of omega-3s and vitamin B if you're vegetarian and don't eat fish?
Okay, so I'm thinking the person's talking about vitamin B12. So as far as the omega-3, good sources include flax seeds as well as chia seeds. Those are some good sources of omega-3. And then for vitamin B12, fortified milks are going to be your source for that. So almond milks there, but always check though the plant-based milk, always check the back to see if it is fortified with B12, as well as nutritional yeast, which is a common substitute for cheese in plant-based diets. That's also pretty fortified with B12. And if you're a vegetarian, if you eat eggs, because I think the person was asking about for vegetarian diets, if you eat eggs, that also contains a good bit of vitamin B12.
All right, I think we'll call that good for questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Sterling, for your time and insightful conversation this afternoon. I think it was great and we all learned a lot. I know I did.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
All right, thank you. So for everybody still watching, would like to invite you to join us for our next webinar on Tuesday, August 4th. Which will be presented by Vladimir Radivojevic. He is the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for Amida Health, Adventist Bolingbrook, and Glen Oaks Hospitals. The presentation is called The COVID-19 Crisis and will focus on the impact the pandemic had on the community and how the hospitals responded. Vladimir graduated from Andrews University with a master's in physical therapy and a master's of business administration from the University of Phoenix. He is also a fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives, the governing body for healthcare executive leadership. Vladimir has held numerous executive leadership roles, including Vice President of Surgical Services, Vice President of Heart and Vascular Services, and Vice President of Cancer Care Services. Vladimir has also led several physician practices, including neurology, pain management, and urology services. He has built numerous new service lines, including robotics, minimally invasive surgery, bariatrics, and several physical rehabilitation clinics. As the Chief Operating Officer for 2 of Adventist Midwest hospitals, Vladimir's focus is leadership and growth of services and leadership of hospital operations. See you next month. Again, that will be August 4 at 3 p.m. Thank you for your time.